I'm standing on my own front porch. The key won't turn. I try it again, same key I've used for 23 years, and it just stops, like it's hitting a wall inside the lock. I remember thinking I was doing something wrong. I thought maybe my hands were shaking more than usual, or maybe I was just tired from the doctor's appointment. So I slow down, I breathe, I try again. Nothing. And that's when I hear footsteps inside. Not Daniel's footsteps. Not the heavy, familiar sound of my son's boots on hardwood floors. These were different, lighter, deliberate, like someone who already knew I was out there. The curtain on the front window shifted, just barely, just enough for someone to look out without being seen. And then the footsteps walked away. I stood there for a long moment with my key in my hand, looking at the front door of the house I bought with my husband 31 years ago. The house where I raised my son. The house where I buried half my life. And something cold moved through me. Because I didn't know it yet. But everything I thought I owned, everything I thought was safe, everything I believed about my family, it had already been taken. I just hadn't found the paperwork yet. If this is your first time watching this channel, welcome. These are real stories from real people. If any of this sounds familiar, stick around, because what I found out next didn't just change my life, it nearly ended it. Hit that like button if you're already feeling something, and let's get into it. My name is Margaret. Most people call me Peggy. I'm 68 years old. I lived, in a brick colonial on Aldermore Drive in a small town in western Pennsylvania. It's a quiet neighborhood, the kind where people still wave from their driveways and leave zucchini on each other's porches in August. My husband, Robert, and I bought that house in 1994. We were 34 years old, terrified, excited, completely broke. We'd scraped together a down payment by skipping vacations for 3 years and selling Robert's motorcycle, which he never stopped bringing up. Even right up until the end, even when he was sick, he'd look at that driveway and say, "You know I had a Harley, right? Gave it up for this driveway." He died in 2019, pancreatic cancer, 4 months from diagnosis to funeral. I don't talk about that part much. What I will tell you is that Robert was a careful, quiet man. He was an accountant for 30 years. He loved spreadsheets the way other men love sports. He had a filing cabinet in the basement that was so organized, it had color-coded tabs. After he died, I found out just how carefully he'd taken care of me. There was a life insurance policy worth $420,000. There were retirement accounts, a 401k, and an IRA that together came to just over $310,000. He had a small investment portfolio, maybe $90,000. And then there was the house, which by 2019 had been appraised at around $580,000. No mortgage. We'd paid it off in 2011. I didn't know the exact numbers at first. It took me almost 6 months after Robert died to understand the full picture. But once I did, once I sat with our accountant, a sweet older man named Harold who'd known us for 20 years. He looked at me across his desk and said, "Peggy, you're going to be okay." Robert made sure of that. I cried in that man's office for a good 10 minutes. I want you to hold on to all of that. Hold on to those numbers. Because this story is really about those numbers, and about what happens when someone else decides they belong to them. My son Daniel was 40 when his father died. He'd been married to Serena for about 2 years at that point. I want to be careful how I describe her, because I think it's important that you understand. I didn't dislike Serena at first. I want to be honest about that. When Daniel brought her home for the first time, I made lasagna. I put out the good dishes. I was nervous and hopeful in the way every mother is when her only child brings someone serious through the door. Serena was beautiful. That's the first thing you noticed. Not in a flashy way, in a deliberate way, like every part of her appearance had been chosen carefully. Perfect posture, a slow, precise way of speaking. She laughed at exactly the right moments. Daniel was completely gone for her. Head over heels doesn't cover it. He looked at her the way men look at things they can't believe are real. She was warm to me that first night. She helped clear the dishes without being asked. She asked me questions about Robert, about the neighborhood, about the garden. She called me Peggy right away, not Mrs. Calloway. At the time, I thought that was a good sign. Looking back, it was information gathering. They got married in September 2017. Small ceremony, maybe 60 people. The wedding was lovely. Serena organized most of it herself, which I thought was impressive. She told me she just wanted things simple and intentional. Those were words she used a lot. Intentional, boundaries, energy. I was 63 years old and, honestly, a little out of my depth with some of it, but I tried. I really tried to meet her where she was. The first year of their marriage was fine, normal. They lived in a rental apartment about 20 minutes from my house. Daniel worked as a project manager for a construction firm. Serena had been in marketing but had transitioned to what she called consulting. I was never entirely sure who her clients were. Daniel didn't seem to know either when I asked. He'd just say, "She's building her business, Mom. Give her time." I gave her time. After Robert died, things shifted. It was subtle at first, the kind of shift you don't see until you're already standing in a different room, wondering how you got there. It was a Tuesday in November 2020. A little over a year after Robert's funeral. I'd been lonely, that's the honest truth. The pandemic had already been going on for months, and being in that big house alone was harder than I expected. I'd spoken to Daniel on the phone almost every day, but I hadn't seen him in person since August. When he called and said he and Serena wanted to come over for dinner, I was so relieved I started cooking before I'd even hung up the phone. They got there around 6. Daniel hugged me a little longer than usual, which I noticed. He seemed tired. Not physically tired, something else, worn down in a way I couldn't quite name. Serena was fine, polite. She'd brought a bottle of wine and a small succulent in a terracotta pot. "For your windowsill," she said. We sat down and ate. I made pot roast because that was always Daniel's favorite, and he said, "Mom, this is incredible," about 4 times, which made me feel like myself again for the first time in weeks. After dinner, we were sitting in the living room, and Daniel got quiet in a way that made me put my wine down. "Mom," he said, "we've been talking." I waited. The apartment lease is up in February. With everything going on, the pandemic, the market, it's just, we haven't been able to save like we planned. And Serena's business took a hit this year. He paused. Serena was looking at a spot just past my shoulder. "We were wondering," he said, "if maybe we could move in here for a while. Just until we get back on our feet. 6 months, maybe less." I looked at him, my son, 40 years old, asking to come home. I said yes before he finished the sentence. And I want you to know, I mean this. I would say yes again under the same circumstances. Because I believed him. Because he was my son. Because the house had 6 empty rooms and I was lonely, and he looked tired in a way that scared me. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't understand for another 18 months, was that the conversation I'd just had wasn't really about the lease. It was about the house. They moved in on a Thursday in February 2021. I'd spent 2 weeks getting their room ready. Fresh paint. New curtains. I moved a dresser up from the basement. I put a small reading lamp on the nightstand because Daniel always liked to read before sleep. Serena walked through the room, looked at everything carefully, thanked me, and then that weekend asked Daniel to take the reading lamp down because the light bothered her. Small thing, barely worth mentioning. But it was the first of 100 small things. The first month was fine, honestly. Having people in the house again felt good. There was noise and movement. There was someone to say good morning to. I cooked most nights. Serena would occasionally join me in the kitchen, but mostly she worked in what we were all calling her office, which was the study just off the hallway where Robert used to do his filing. That bothered me a little, just a little. I hadn't fully sorted through Robert's things in there. There were still boxes, still files, still his reading glasses sitting on the desk like he'd just stepped out. When I mentioned it to Daniel, he said, "Serena just needs a quiet space, Mom." She moved the glasses into a drawer so she wouldn't feel weird about them. I didn't say anything, but I went in there later that day when she was out, and the filing cabinet, Robert's color-coded filing cabinet, had been moved to the corner and pushed against the wall like it was furniture that needed to be out of the way. I stood there for a long moment. I told myself I was being sensitive. By April, things had quietly rearranged themselves. Dinner time had shifted from 6 o'clock, which was when I'd always eaten, to 7:30, because that's when Serena finished her calls. I'd started eating earlier and then reheating food for them. The living room had new throw pillows I didn't buy. A plant I'd had in the corner for 9 years had been moved to the garage because it was making the space feel cluttered. My mail, which had always come through the front door slot, had been moved to a basket on the kitchen counter, where Serena organized it before I saw it. I told myself that was helpful. I told myself I was adjusting to sharing my space after years alone. That was fair. That was normal. I wasn't asking the right question yet. The right question wasn't, why is she rearranging things? The right question was, why does she need access to my mail? In May, Daniel sat me down and brought up something I hadn't expected. "Serena and I have been thinking about the house," he said. "What about it?" "Well, the thing is, we're both on the lease here now, or we would be if there was a lease, and with us living here long-term, it might make more sense legally to, I don't know, formalize things a little." "What does that mean?" He shifted in his chair. "Like, maybe look into adding us to the deed. Just so it's not just your name, just so there's clarity." I looked at him for a long time. "Daniel," I said carefully, "this is my house." "I know that, Mom. I'm not saying it isn't. Your father and I bought this house. It's in my name. Everything is in my name." I know. He was quiet. "Serena just thinks it would be cleaner. Serena thinks." I told him I'd think about it. I said I wanted to talk to Harold, our accountant, before I made any decisions about the deed. Daniel nodded like that was reasonable. The conversation ended there. That night, I lay awake thinking about the filing cabinet pushed against the wall. I called Harold the next morning. He was 73 by then and semi-retired, but he still took my calls. I told him what Daniel had proposed, adding their names to the deed, and I asked him what he thought. There was a pause on the line. "Peggy," he said, "don't do that." "Why not?" "Because the house is one of your primary assets. The moment you put someone else's name on that deed, you've given them a legal ownership stake. And if things ever went sideways, and I'm not saying they would, but if they did, you could be in a very complicated position in your own home." "He's my son, Harold." "I know he is, and I'm sure his intentions are good. But this isn't about intentions. This is about documents. And documents don't care about intentions." I thanked him and hung up. I didn't bring it up with Daniel again. And for a while he didn't bring it up with me. But I noticed, after that Serena got quieter around me. Not colder. It was more subtle than that. She was still polite, still pleasant, but there was something behind her eyes that had shifted. Like a door that had been left partially open had now been carefully, quietly closed. Summer came. My neighbor Dorothy mentioned one afternoon over the fence that she'd received a mailing from the county assessor's office that had been intended for me. It had been delivered to her by mistake and then forwarded. Strange. "It was addressed to your house," Dorothy said, handing it over. "But the return address was off somehow. I don't know. Mail's been weird lately." I took the envelope. It was a property tax notification. Completely routine. Except there was a handwritten note clipped to it that I didn't recognize. Someone had written in neat, precise handwriting. "Filed. Original with documents." I looked at that note for a long time. I didn't know what original with documents meant. I didn't know whose handwriting it was. But something about it stayed with me, like a pebble in a shoe. That same week, I went into Robert's old study while Serena was out. I wasn't snooping. I want to be clear about that. At least, that's what I told myself. I was looking for a specific document, a copy of the deed. I wanted to see it, hold it, remind myself it was there. The filing cabinet was where I'd last seen it, pushed against the wall. I opened the top drawer. It was empty. I checked the second drawer. Empty. The third. Empty. I stood there in that room, in my husband's room, in my house, and looked at 3 empty drawers where Robert had kept 30 years of careful, color-coded records. I went to find the boxes he'd stored in the basement. Gone. I didn't say anything to Daniel that day, or the next day. I needed to think. I needed to be sure, because part of me, A very strong, very loud part of me kept saying, "You're imagining things. There's an explanation. You're grieving and alone and reading meaning into empty drawers. This is your son. He would never." But there was another part of me, quieter, older, the part that had kept a household running and raised a child and managed money for 40 years. And that part kept asking one simple question: where are the documents? In September of 2021, Daniel came home one evening looking the way he'd looked the night they'd first asked to move in. That particular kind of tired. We were alone in the kitchen. Serena was upstairs. "Mom," he said, "I want to talk to you about Dad's accounts." My chest tightened. "What about them?" We think, that it might be smart to consolidate things. You know, the IRA, the 401k. The way they're set up right now, there's a lot of fees. And the investment portfolio, Harold's getting old, and that account's underperforming. "Daniel, Harold has managed that account for—" I know, but Serena knows someone, a financial advisor. Really reputable. She thinks he could do better for you. Where is Serena finding all these people? He blinked. What do you mean? I mean, she has a financial advisor ready. She has opinions about the deed. She knows about fees and performance. I kept my voice even. She's very interested in the finances. Daniel's jaw tightened. She's trying to help, Mom. Is that a crime? No, I said. It's not. But I called Harold the next morning and asked him to meet me for lunch, off the books. Just the two of us. We met at the same diner we'd been going to for 20 years. Harold had a grilled cheese and I couldn't eat. I told him everything. The empty filing cabinet, the moved documents, the mail, the deed conversation, the financial advisor. Harold put his sandwich down. "Peggy," he said slowly, "do you know who all the beneficiaries are on your accounts right now?" "Me," I said, "and Daniel. Robert set it up so Daniel would—" "Have you checked recently, since Robert died?" I stopped. I assumed. "Assuming is how people end up with nothing," Harold said, not unkindly. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small notebook and pen. "Here's what I want you to do. I want you to call each financial institution, each one. And I want you to ask them two things. Who are the listed beneficiaries, and have there been any changes to the account in the last 12 months? I wrote it down. "Harold," I said, "am I being paranoid?" He looked at me over his glasses. 3 empty drawers. I made the calls over the next 2 weeks, from my bedroom with the door closed, while Serena was in the study and Daniel was at work. The first call, the 401k, fine. My name, Daniel as secondary beneficiary, no changes. The second call, the IRA, fine. Same structure, no changes. The third call, Robert's investment portfolio. The woman on the phone was pleasant. She confirmed my name, she confirmed the account number, and then she said, carefully, "I do see there was a beneficiary change request submitted on this account." I stopped breathing. When? It looks like March of this year. March, 2 months after Daniel and Serena moved in. What was changed? A secondary beneficiary was added, Serena Ann Calloway. I sat on the edge of my bed for a very long time. Was I notified of this change? I asked. A letter would have been mailed to the address on file, she said. Would you like me to send a duplicate notification? My address on file, the house on Aldermore Drive, where my mail went into a basket, where someone organized it before I saw it. I hung up and sat perfectly still. I want to describe what that moment felt like, because I think it's important. It wasn't panic. It was almost the opposite of panic. It was this strange, crystallizing stillness. Like everything that had been blurry and confusing for the last year was suddenly coming into focus. She hadn't moved in with us to get back on their feet. She had moved in to get close to the accounts, and I still didn't know how deep it went. I thought about confronting Daniel that night. I rehearsed it. I had the whole conversation planned in my head. I was going to be calm. I was going to lay out the facts. But when he came home and she kissed him on the cheek and asked about his day and handed him a glass of water like it was the most natural thing in the world, I hesitated. because I saw something I hadn't let myself see before. Daniel was different around her. Not in the way people change when they're in love, in a smaller, quieter way. He didn't finish sentences the same way he used to. He checked her expression before he responded to things. He'd started calling me Margaret instead of Mom when she was in the room, something she'd apparently mentioned as being more adult, more healthy for boundaries. My son was calling me by my first name, and he thought that was normal. I understood, in that moment, that confronting her directly would accomplish nothing, because she wouldn't be the one I'd have to convince. I'd have to convince Daniel. And Daniel had been living inside her version of reality for long enough that my version, with empty filing cabinets and missing documents and beneficiary changes, was going to sound like a scared old woman with a grudge. I needed evidence, real evidence. And I needed to find it before she found out I was looking. I started paying much closer attention. Things I'd let slide before, I cataloged them. The mail basket. Whenever I could, I'd get to the basket first, in the mornings, before Serena came downstairs. Twice in October, I found letters that had already been opened and resealed. So slightly you'd miss it if you weren't looking. The flap just a little too neat, the seal a little too fresh. She was reading my mail. I started getting certain things mailed to Dorothy's address next door. Just sensitive things, bank statements, legal notices. Dorothy was 80 years old and completely trustworthy, and thought the whole thing was absolutely wild, in a way that made her more helpful, not less. In November, I found something that changed everything. I was in the kitchen early, before anyone was up. I was making coffee, and on the edge of the counter, half tucked under Serena's tote bag, I saw a piece of paper. I don't know why I looked at it, some instinct, something about the corner I could see, the letterhead. I pulled it out slightly, just enough to read. It was a document from the county courthouse, a property records inquiry. Someone had requested a copy of the deed for the house on Aldermore Drive. The name on the request was Serena Calloway. The date was 2 weeks ago. I put the paper back exactly where I found it. I poured my coffee, I went to my room, and I sat there thinking about one simple fact. The deed was in my name only. Robert's name had come off when he died. I had the death certificate process handled by an attorney. I knew this. So why was she requesting a copy of the deed? What was she looking for? What was she planning to do with it? That was the morning I started to understand that this wasn't just about beneficiary changes on a portfolio. This was about the house, about the whole picture, about everything Robert had left behind. She wasn't moving furniture and reading my mail to be difficult. She was doing reconnaissance. And I had let her into my home. I had a doctor's appointment in December. Routine checkup, blood pressure, thyroid, the usual catalog of things that come with being 67. My doctor's name was Patricia Webb, and she'd been my doctor for 12 years. More importantly, she had become, over those years, genuinely a friend. The kind you can call outside of office hours. After the appointment, as I was getting ready to leave, I said, "Pat, I need to ask you something strange." She sat back down. Okay. I told her everything, not just the medical parts, everything. The mail, the documents, the beneficiary change, the deed inquiry. Patricia listened without interrupting, which was why I trusted her. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Peggy, I want you to call someone for me. Her name is Carol Hennessy. She's a retired real estate attorney. She did some work on a property dispute my sister had a few years ago, and she was absolutely brilliant. I don't know if I can afford. She'll do a consultation for free. She does it as a favor now that she's not taking full cases. Call her, tonight." She wrote the number on a prescription pad. I called Carol that evening from my car, in the driveway, engine running. She answered on the third ring. Sharp, direct voice. 70s, I guessed. She sounded like someone who didn't waste words. I told her the short version. She asked 3 questions. Is the house solely in your name? Yes. Has your son asked you to sign any documents in the last 12 months? I paused, thought hard. He asked me to sign something in the spring. He said it was for estate planning. I signed it. Silence on the line. Do you have a copy of what you signed? I don't think I kept one. Another silence. longer. Peggy, she said, I need you to listen to me carefully. First thing tomorrow morning, I want you to go to the county courthouse, the property records office, and I want you to request the current deed on your property. Not a copy of the original deed, the current, live deed that's on file today. Why? Because I want to see if what you signed in the spring changed anything. I gripped the steering wheel. Carol, I said, if something happened to that deed, if she somehow... Don't spiral, just go get the document. Call me when you have it. I drove to the courthouse the next morning before Serena was up. I told Daniel I had an early hair appointment. He nodded without looking up from his phone. The property records office opened at 8:30. There were 2 people ahead of me. I stood in line with my hands very still at my sides, which was something I had to concentrate on. When I got to the window, I gave them the address. The woman typed for a moment. I'll just need your ID, she said, and your name needs to match the deed to get a full copy. Margaret Ann Calloway, I said. She typed again, looked at the screen, then she looked at me, then back at the screen. Ma'am, she said slowly, can I ask, are you aware of a recent transfer on this property? The floor dropped out from under me. A transfer? It looks like there was a deed amendment filed in April. A quitclaim deed transfer. To whom? She looked at the screen. Serena Ann Calloway and Daniel Robert Calloway, joint tenants with right of survivorship. I put my hand on the counter. Joint tenants with right of survivorship. That meant if I died, the house went directly to both of them. No probate, no contest, no nothing. And I had apparently signed this in April. Except I had no memory of signing a quitclaim deed. I had no memory of a notary. I had no memory of anyone explaining to me that I was signing away ownership of my own home. What I had signed in April, what Daniel had handed me with a brief explanation about estate planning, I was starting to think was something else entirely. I called Carol from the parking lot. She was quiet for almost a full minute after I told her. I need you to bring me a copy of that deed, she said. Can you be at my house in an hour? Carol Hennessy lived in a small house about 20 minutes from mine. It was organized the way lawyers' homes often are. Bookshelves everywhere, stacks of paper that looked chaotic but probably weren't, a large desk by the window covered in yellow legal pads. She read the deed slowly. I sat across from her and tried to breathe. Okay, she said finally. Here's what this says. In April of this year, you signed a quitclaim deed transferring joint ownership of the property to yourself, Daniel, and Serena. You're still on the deed, but they are too. I didn't understand that's what I was signing. Can you describe the document Daniel gave you in April? He said it was for estate planning. Something about making sure the house transferred smoothly if I died. He had a stack of papers and he flipped to the pages with sticky notes and said, just sign here. There was a notary, someone I didn't know. She came to the house. Carol set the deed down. Who was the notary? I don't know. Young woman. Didn't say much. And the notary seal, do you know what office she was from? I have no idea. Carol wrote something on her legal pad. Peggy, here's the issue. You sign this document. There's evidence of notarization. Legally, this deed is valid. But I didn't know. I know, and that matters. But the burden of proof for showing that you didn't understand what you were signing, or that you were misled, that's not easy to meet. It's called fraud in the inducement, and it can be argued, but we need more. What kind of more? Evidence that this was intentional. That you were deceived systematically, not just once. She tapped the legal pad. Tell me about the beneficiary change on the investment portfolio. We talked for 3 hours. By the time I left, Carol had a notepad full of dates and names, and I had a stomach full of cold dread. Don't confront anyone yet, she told me at the door. Not Daniel, not Serena, not a word. I need time to research the notary, look at the quitclaim filing, and see if there's anything else recorded on this property that you don't know about. What else could there be? She looked at me over her reading glasses. Let's hope nothing. But there was something else. Carol called me 3 days later. Get to Dorothy's house, she said. I'm going to send you something. I walked over in my coat at 8 in the morning. Dorothy made us tea without asking and handed me her laptop. Carol's email was already open. It was a property records search, Aldermore Drive, my address. There were 3 recorded documents. The original deed from 1994, Robert and Margaret Calloway. The deed amendment from 2019, removing Robert's name after his death. And a 3rd document, filed in October, 2 months ago. A 2nd quitclaim deed. This one had transferred the property to Serena Ann Calloway alone. I read that line 4 times. Dorothy read it over my shoulder and made a sound I'd never heard her make. Serena Ann Calloway alone, I said out loud. Not me, not Daniel, not both of them together. Just her. I called Carol immediately. You saw it, she said. She transferred it to herself? That's what the document shows. And Peggy, your name isn't on this 2nd quitclaim at all. Neither is Daniel's. This deed shows a direct transfer from the April quitclaim, where you're all joint tenants, to Serena as sole owner. But she can't do that. She needs my signature. She needs Daniel's signature. She needs signatures. The question is, whose are on this document? I stopped breathing. You're saying she may have forged. I'm saying the signatures need to be examined. I've already requested a full copy of the filing. The notary seal on this one is different from the April document. And here's the thing, Peggy. Carol's voice was very careful now. The notary whose name is on this October filing, I ran a license check with the state. That notary's license was revoked in 2019. A revoked notary. A forged signature. A stolen house. And then something Carol said next stopped everything. Peggy, there's one more thing I want you to check. Does Serena have any access to your estate documents, your will, any power of attorney? I felt my blood go cold. She doesn't have power of attorney. I never signed. And then I stopped. The spring, the stack of papers, the sticky notes. Carol, I said slowly, how many documents were in that stack? A pause. How many did you sign? I don't know, he flipped through them. I thought it was 3 or 4 pages of the same document. Another silence. Peggy, I want you to request your current estate documents from whatever attorney drafted them for you. Do you have a copy of your will? It's at home, in the study, Robert's study. The empty filing cabinet. I didn't have a copy, not anymore. Carol worked fast once she understood the full scope. She had a colleague, a woman named Janet who practiced elder law, review everything. Together they identified, based on what we had so far, a potential case involving fraudulent deed transfer, elder financial abuse, and possible forgery of notarized documents. If the signatures on the October deed are forged, Carol told me, that's a felony. That's not a civil matter. That's criminal fraud. I asked her what I needed to do. We need to move carefully, and we need to move soon, she said. For one thing, she owns the house on paper right now. That means, technically, she could try to sell it, mortgage it, or do something else with it before we get an injunction. She would have to have my signature to sell it. If she's willing to forge once, she'll forge again. We need to get a court order protecting the property before she knows we're on to her. Carol also said something else, something that stayed with me. Peggy, I need you to think about Daniel. Do you believe he knows what she's done? I sat with that for a long time. I think, I said slowly, that he knows pieces, but I don't think he knows the whole thing, because if he did... I stopped. He's not a bad person, Carol. He loves her in a way that makes him smaller than he is. That may actually work in our favor, she said. We needed the April document I'd signed, the full packet. We needed to know exactly what was in that stack of papers. Carol contacted the notary whose name appeared on the April filing. She was legitimate, her license was current, but she had no memory of coming to my house in April. Which meant someone else had come to my house in April, claiming to be a notary, or the seal had been applied fraudulently. We had a handwriting expert review a copy of my signature from the April deed and compare it to known samples. 3 days later, he confirmed something that made Carol very quiet. The April signature was genuine. I had signed it. The October signature was not. Carol filed for an emergency injunction on the property on a Thursday in January. The judge granted a temporary restraining order the same day, freezing any transfer or sale of the property pending investigation. Serena didn't know yet. I went home that evening and cooked dinner like nothing had changed. I passed the bread. I asked about Daniel's day. I watched Serena cut her food with that precise, deliberate way she had, and I thought about the notary whose license had been revoked in 2019, and I didn't let one bit of it reach my face. I was very good at it by that point. I'd had a year of practice. Carol also contacted the county sheriff's office. A detective named Marcus Webb, no relation to my doctor, just a coincidence, took the case. He was a quiet, methodical man, mid-40s, with the air of someone who'd seen everything twice. He asked me to tell him the story from the beginning. I did. He asked one question that struck me. Has your son seen the October deed? Not that I know of, I said. Carol says it was filed in Serena's name alone. Meaning if it had gone through, Detective Webb said slowly, he would have been cut out too. I looked at him. Your daughter-in-law wasn't just stealing from you, he said. She may have been stealing from both of you. The plan was simple. Carol would meet with Daniel first. Not me, not Detective Webb. Carol. Because we needed to know whose side Daniel was going to land on, and we needed him to understand, before Serena could spin it, what had actually been filed in his name, what he had apparently agreed to, and what had been done to both of us. We met at Carol's house. Daniel came alone. I had asked him to, and he'd agreed, which I thought was a good sign. I watched him read the documents. It took a long time. He read them the way his father used to read things, carefully, slowly, going back to reread sections. When he finished, he looked at me. And then he looked away. And then he said something I wasn't expecting. She told me it was estate planning. She said all of it was to protect you. I know. She said you were getting older and the house needed to be protected from probate complications. Daniel. I believed her. His voice cracked on the last word, just slightly, but I heard it. I know you did. Mom. He looked at me. He looked about 20 years old. Did she forge your signature? On the October deed, yes. He put his hands over his face. I let him sit there. I didn't rush him. Some moments need their full weight. After a while, he looked up. His eyes were red. What do you need me to do? 3 days later, Detective Webb asked Daniel to come home, as normal, as unremarkable as possible, and have a conversation with Serena about the house. There was a recording device. Everything was properly warranted and documented. I was not there. Carol had strongly advised me to stay away, and she was right. But Dorothy called me as it was happening, because I'd called her 10 times that morning and she'd told me to stop calling and just come over. So I was sitting in her kitchen drinking tea I couldn't taste. I heard the full recording the next day. Daniel started it normally. He said he'd been going through some old documents. He mentioned the deed. He mentioned the estate paperwork. Serena said, very calmly, I think that was all handled. What are you worried about? I found something, he said. There's a deed from October, in just your name. A short silence. I don't know what you mean. Serena. The house is in your name. Just yours. That's... Another pause. That must be a recording error at the county office. Those things happen. The notary on the October deed had a revoked license. The silence after that one was longer. Where are you getting all this? Does it matter? Did your mother put you up to this? She's my mother. She's trying to cause problems between us. She's never accepted me. She's been looking for a reason. Serena. Daniel's voice was quiet and hard. She didn't put me up to anything. I'm looking at documents. Those documents could mean anything. They don't mean anything. They mean what they say. And what they say is that in April we signed papers that weren't what we were told they were. And in October, someone filed a deed with my mother's signature that isn't her signature. A very long pause. I was protecting us, she said. Her voice changed, softer. Daniel, your mother has all that money and she's old, and I just wanted to make sure. Make sure what? That when the time came, we wouldn't lose everything to taxes and probate and... You forged her signature. Did you forge her signature on that deed? Silence. Serena, yes or no? The silence lasted 10 seconds. It wasn't supposed to go this far, she said. And for the first time, she sounded like someone who had miscalculated. There it was. Not a dramatic speech, not a breakdown, just 6 words that admitted everything. It wasn't supposed to go this far. Detective Webb arrested Serena 2 days later, at Carol's instruction and with the full case file in hand. She was charged with fraudulent deed transfer, forgery, and financial elder abuse. Her attorney, very quickly hired, tried to argue that it was all a misunderstanding, that the intent was good, that it was a family matter. The judge was unmoved. If you've made it this far, I'd love to know what you would have done differently. Would you have confronted her sooner? Would you have told Daniel before you had the evidence? Drop a comment below. Because I think about those choices constantly. Every day, I think about the moments where the story could have gone differently. The criminal case took 14 months to fully resolve. Serena's attorney did manage to have one charge reduced, but the forgery charge stuck. The financial elder abuse charge stuck. She pled guilty to both in exchange for avoiding trial. She was sentenced to 3 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and was ordered to pay full restitution, which included attorney's fees and the costs of remedying all the documents. The second quitclaim deed was voided by court order. The first one, the April deed that I had genuinely signed, believing it to be something else, was also successfully challenged under fraud in the inducement. Carol was right, it wasn't easy, but we had enough. The notary who had appeared at my house and falsely presented herself to me had come forward once she understood what had happened and what her role had been. It turned out Serena had hired her through a third party and told her it was a legitimate estate planning signing. When the woman understood the full picture, she cooperated with authorities. As of the court's final order, the house on Aldermore Drive is solely in my name again. Just like it always should have been. The investment portfolio beneficiary change was also reversed. Carol flagged it for the financial institution and they cooperated with the investigation. And Daniel. This is the complicated part, and I won't pretend it isn't. Daniel filed for divorce shortly after Serena's arrest. He moved in with his friend Marcus for a few months while everything sorted out. He and I talked more in those 6 months than we had in the previous 5 years. Long, honest, hard conversations about the things we'd both missed, the things we'd both wanted to believe that weren't true. He asked me once, sitting at the kitchen table in my house, how I'd stayed so calm through all of it. I told him the truth. I wasn't calm, I said. I was terrified. But I kept thinking about your father, about how much work he put into taking care of us. How many spreadsheets, how many years of careful, boring, patient planning. And I thought, I am not going to let someone dismantle 30 years of your father's love. I'm not. Daniel nodded. He was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry, Mom, he said. 3 words. But they were the right 3 words. Spring came. I put the reading lamp back on the nightstand in what is now, again, just the guest room. I put Robert's color-coded filing cabinet back in the center of the study. I found a box of his files in Carol's storage unit. She'd had them preserved as evidence during the case. A police inventory, everything returned, even his reading glasses. I put them back on the desk exactly where they were. I planted flowers in the front yard that I'd been meaning to plant for years. Yellow ones. Dorothy told me they were garish. I told her that was exactly why I'd chosen them. I started going to a grief support group, not for the case, but for Robert. I'd been postponing grief for 2 years, and it turned out postponed grief doesn't actually go away. It just waits in the basement with the files. I've thought a lot about what the whole experience taught me. I don't want to preach. I'm not going to stand here and give you a list of lessons. You're smart enough to have absorbed them on your own. But I will say one thing. The scariest part of this story, the part that still keeps me up sometimes, isn't what Serena did. It's how close it came to working. How many times I almost dismissed the instinct that something was wrong. How many times I told myself I was imagining things, or being unfair, or letting grief make me paranoid. There's a voice inside all of us that knows. that notices the things that don't quite add up, that counts the empty drawers. The kindest thing you can do for yourself is to listen to it. Thank you for spending so much time with this story. I mean that. If you've ever felt gaslit by someone close to you, if you've ever been told you were imagining things when you weren't, if you've ever been afraid that speaking up would cost you more than staying silent, this one was for you. Leave a comment. Tell me what you felt. Tell me about a moment you trusted your gut. Those conversations matter to me more than you know. If this story hit something in you, please subscribe. Every subscriber means another story told, another person who knows they're not alone. And if you have a story of your own, reach out. Some of the most powerful videos on this channel started with a single message. Take care of yourself, trust what you know, and I'll see you in the next one.